there was a piece that came out in Washington Post today involving interviews with 20 members of the White House staff. And there was a lot of like clearly background information from senators, some of which was sort of TikTok about what Chris Van Hollen was doing.
Yeah.
I can tell you from my experience in being interviewed by the press when I was a story at one point that, and I only knew to do this because I knew people in this industry, you can negotiate where you are quoted and you can negotiate where you are off the record, but you can basically create the timeline that exists in the TikTok and the sort of like God's perspective on the narrative.
Which is why, you know, when you were hearing, I think, senators speaking to the Washington Post or Politico or other outlets about quiet discontent about Biden's strategy, it was probably Van Hollen, but now he's taking it public.
It sure appears like that. And the fact, though, that there was this much cooperation with the White House also leads me to believe that either there is a sort of like growing mutiny there, or people are, because people are afraid that this is having such severe political impact that they want to distance themselves from it. Or it signals that the White House may be getting prepared to sort of slightly shift their policy and are trying to get a sense of like, who's going to get upset about this and what price are we going to pay? I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine outside of like Haim Saiban or whatever that, that Democratic Israeli billionaire or out in California is, like that there's many people who are going to be like,
yeah.
Really, we feel like Israel hasn't done enough to, harm the civilian population there. Now, I'm sure there are some. Some of them just wrote a letter, I guess, from Hollywood. I don't know who those people are, but so with all that said, Data for Progress had a poll with about 6 questions asked, 8 questions. And these are sort of fascinating. The first is question 1. Oh, and I should say the overall, let's start with question 3. Let's start with question 3. If the candidates for president this fall were Democrat Joe Biden and Republican Donald Trump, who would you vote for? Joe Biden, 46%, Donald Trump, 45%, not sure, 9%.
Wow.
And that 9% is sort of like a little bit impressive because what more do you need to find out about these guys?
I also want to say, too, we've seen better national polling from someone like Hillary Clinton in 2016. And that also held with her popular vote total that did not help her in the states that she needed. Because we're seeing very concerning polling out of Arizona, Georgia, Michigan.
I want to make
states
it clear
that matter, Pennsylvania.
This is not to, people should not be like going like, oh, this is a good sign. We're just analyzing this poll because there's some other sort of questions that really give you a sense of what's going on here. I don't know if this, mean 46, 45%, 9% means anything in terms of these swing states. All right, now go to question 1. So 46% said Biden, 45% said Trump. Trump has a ceiling in a way that I think Biden doesn't, and I think this poll shows it. Do you approve or disapprove of President Joe Biden's performance? 39% approval, 55% disapproval, 6% unsure. Those are not good numbers. Not good numbers. Go to question 2. In terms of favorability, which is, more or less, do you approve or disapprove? It's a similar question, not the exact same. Favorable, 43%, unfavorable, 50%, not sure, 7%. So 50% unfavorable, but 55% disapproval for Biden. So the majority of the country does not like either one of these guys. But again, when you go to question 3, who would you vote for? Biden's ahead. And really what that signifies is that the double haters are going to be the ones who decide this election.
Yeah.
And the double haters, there may be more people who dislike Joe Biden. It's possible. But the depth of their dislike, the people who dislike Donald Trump dislike him more than the people who dislike Joe Biden. It's just bizarre to be talking this way, but that's the way it is. Here is the generic vote for question 4 on Congress. It's split. I don't think there's much you can. I don't think there's much you could take from this. If the election were held today, would you vote for the Democratic candidate or the Republican candidate in your district? It's also a weird phrasing of that question, because you'd be like, well, wait, the Republican candidate, my candidate, my congressman is already a Republican. There's not that much there. Go to Q5 as far as I'm concerned. All right, I'm going to give you some more information about the candidates for president, and after each one, ask you again who you'd vote for. Here's the first one. Democrat Joe Biden supports restoring Roe v. Wade and supports abortion rights. Republican Donald Trump takes credit for overturning Roe v. Wade and opposes abortion rights. Having heard this, let me ask you again, if the election were today, who would you vote for? Donald Trump loses 1 percentage point. Remember, it was 46 to 45 before. Joe Biden gains 2. That's it. You can't have that articulated any better than that. Now, that 2%, that's relevant. And if it's in 2% in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Nevada and Georgia, that's good. But it's not as big as people think it is.
I just think this shows that the Dems' approach on abortion is doomed. Restoring Roe, does that mean anything to anybody under 35? And supports abortion rights? Are we supporting a right to act, like not just like right to privacy? Are we actually facilitating people with reproductive care in this country? Like this, it requires a broader thing than just we're going to turn the page back to Roe versus Wade.
I don't think that's what's going on there. Because if you were to look at the off-year election, I bet you that number would be much higher. If you were just having the bottom line is low propensity voting people do not feel strongly about this. Now, you could argue they don't because of what you're saying, but that seems to me to be like there's no data to support that. But all we do know, and there's a piece in Vox about this, is that low propensity voters who you need in an on-year election, you won't see it in a special election, but low propensity voters don't care as much about abortion rights.
But that's a chicken or the egg thing, right? Like, Matt, I don't want to characterize what you're saying, Matt, but could that also be like part of the fact that they're not messaging it correctly to get low propensity voters to care?
It's possible. It's possible that they're not messaging it properly.
But that in part, that's because you have Biden going and speaking to donors and saying, like, well, all the major religions sort of agree, and I don't think we should have abortion on demand.
My guess is low propensity voters don't even hear about that. I don't even think they hear about that. It's not that they think that he's not sufficiently pro
that's the point.
Abortion.
That's the point.
I think it's more maybe low propensity voters don't realize the relationship between the presidency,
that's
the courts,
on Biden then.
And well, there's a failure of messaging if you think that's possible, but that's just I'm just making the analysis there.
Okay.
Like, I don't think it's that they don't feel like it's enough, because the people who care the most about this are coming out and voting in those like low high propensity voter election.
I just think there could be more room for improvement than maybe you're indicating.
There could be.
This does go back to what we talk about with Natalie Scher, and that we can't just bank on this being a giant layup in all elections. And
hers was the opposite, though. It turns out hers was that she thinks that, like, now maybe it bore out in some of the congressional races in 2022. Her assessment, but she didn't think it was going to impact
the midterms.
She didn't think it would impact the midterms at all,
but
and
now
it did.
It seems like it's not impacting the general more. Like that analysis seems more applicable to this.
Part of it is because part of it is in a lot of those states that were key states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, like the rights have been protected. And in the states where rights have been protected, that's where you see it not having the same resonance.
Or Biden's suppressing the vote. Or Biden is so unpopular and we're underestimating that he's really going to be a hamper on like the easy messaging issues that the Democrats have in the fall.
I'm just going by what I'm looking at these polls here.
Sorry.
I mean, and so here's Q6, question 6. Democrat Joe Biden supports a bipartisan border security immigration bill that is endorsed by the Border Patrol Union. Republican Donald Trump opposes the bipartisan border security and immigration bill that is endorsed by the Border Patrol Union. Having heard this, let me ask you again. If the election for president were today, who would you vote for? Biden loses a point. Actually loses 2 points. And Donald Trump gains 2 points. So the point of this is, and you could make the same argument, they're not messaging that they're tough on the border well enough that Joe Biden isn't. Or it could just be that this is not an issue in which Joe Biden is going to win.
Exactly.
Now, in the White House, they may say, well, if Joe Biden hadn't done this, the gap would have been 46 to 40% or 48 to 40% or whatever. But the point is that they have gone as far as they can with immigration, and there's no there. They literally lose 2 points when the question becomes focused on immigration, which is what we've been saying since day one. You are playing on their court, and you're doing so with their game plan. Yeah. Not only are you playing on their court, you're playing with their game plan. Go to Q7, which is the classic Democratic court. Democrat Joe Biden supports reducing inflation by increasing taxes on corporations and individuals who make more than $400,000 a year. Republican Donald Trump supports reducing inflation by cutting Medicare and Social Security. Having heard this, let me ask you again, if the election were president today, who would you vote for? 51% Joe Biden, 39% Donald Trump. Not sure 10%, which is 1 point off of where it was before.
Okay, well, the problem I would say that immediately becomes clear to me here is that Donald Trump is not publicly saying that he will cut Social Security and Medicare to reduce inflation.
Well, first off, he said that he needs entitlement reform. And Donald Trump doesn't have to say that. Joe Biden can say that he's going to cut that.
I agree.
And I mean, this is, again, like what these questions do is they present to a voter, if you heard this, how would it impact your vote? And what we see is, if you hear the way that abortion is aligned and who's going to protect the right to abortion, it's somewhat helpful to Joe Biden. Marginally. If you hear that Joe Biden's just as tough on the border, maybe even tougher on the border than Donald Trump, it hurts Joe Biden. If you hear that Joe Biden wants to tax corporations and individuals and that Donald Trump wants to cut Social Security and Medicare, it enormously helps Joe Biden.
Yep.
And so here is the last question. Because what these polls are meant to do is to give the Biden administration and the Biden campaign a clue as to what is the most, which pond should they be fishing in? And which pond should they not? And a vague notion of what fishing rod they should bring and what lure and what bait. Here's the final one. Democrat Joe Biden supports a humanitarian ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Republican Donald Trump does not support a humanitarian ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Having heard this, and again, Joe Biden obviously does not support or maybe he said that word, but let's be honest.
Oh, yeah, whatever.
Having heard this, let me ask you again, if the election for president today, who would you vote for? Joe Biden stays the same, 46%. Donald Trump loses a couple of percentage point. I'm sorry, Biden picks up a point, Trump loses a point, not sure, gains 3. So the bottom line is, like, we know what Joe Biden needs to do in terms of like how people are going to respond to it. And the Biden administration does too. And then the question is, can they execute this? It's one thing to ask somebody a question and like, this is what I'm asking you to can you execute this to the broader population? Communicate that these are the positions if they become ones. I mean, that's it.
I thought that the State of the Union was a start in the way that he messaged during that, right? And I was leaving for vacation the next day, so I didn't get to see the responses and things like that. But it indicated to me, okay, this is like when Obama was running in 2012, where he's going to start to be a little bit more, I guess, going after the rich and speaking populist. A little bit more populist. But Biden is not doing a good job in messaging that right now. He's putting out some videos about Social Security and Medicare on TikTok and stuff like that. But get on the airwaves and start to have these kinds of conversations. And it does indicate too that a change in policy on Israel for maybe the first time in my lifetime is actually something that could have electoral consequences. And it's definitely the first time in Biden's lifetime that he's ever considered such a thing. And that's, I think, a good indication of why the White House has been so recalcitrant on this issue, as opposed, in addition to Biden's ideological Zionism. It's just that this has never been something that's resonated with voters in this way.
Yeah, I mean,
in a presidential race.
I'm not sure. All it does is it helps Joe Biden a little bit. And Joe Biden's losing votes because of his position. Yeah, Donald Trump is basically more or less locked in, it seems to me. There's a tiny fluctuation, but I mean, look at that.
That one's astonishing. Yeah.
The Social Security one.
Yeah.
I mean, it bumps them outside. It's the only question that bumps either one of them outside the margin of error. Pretty obvious.
But then you got to talk about increasing taxes, and let's see how the donors.
They've already done that.
Yeah.
I mean, they've come out, and he's made the point is, I mean, this is how badly their messaging is. 3 weeks ago, they introduced this. They introduced that, raising the taxes on corporations and individuals above $400,000.
Would have been nice if he could have run on the child tax credit.
Well, the child tax credit right now is being
negotiated. Yeah.
Well, it had been hammered out, but now the Republicans in the Senate are balking at it because they're saying we can maybe do better when Trump wins. That's where they're at with that. So that's where we're at. 646-257-3920. I just found that polling interesting.
Definitely.
And hope that the White House sees it.